Good evening. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here this evening for this lecture, and I'm going to talk to you today about owning your city. And I want to begin by suggesting that our cities, in fact, are both our greatest hope and our greatest risk. Vancouver, despite its many, many virtues, alas, is no exception. Now, I like to be bold. I'm known for being bold. But I'm not quite so bold as to be willing to pontificate about hometown politics that are not my own. I especially don't want to talk about my own. So while I'm going to be speaking today about the importance of owning your city, that is, building broad and deep constituencies for progressive city building, I will be drawing in my examples on some of the work that I'm undertaking and the challenges that I'm trying to solve in the context of the City of Toronto. Because some of those challenges make us more alike than, in fact, different. And just for clarity in this presentation, when I reference Vancouver, unless I say the City of Vancouver, I am, in fact, going to be talking about the region. And one of the reasons is, of course, because that when we compare Vancouver and Toronto, Toronto is an amalgamated city, and our city is incomparable to the Vancouver region in terms of the scale and the size and its area. I want to suggest, and here is just one of the examples of the ways in which we are alike, our mode of travel. If we look at the primary ways that Torontonians, in fact, get to work, it is by driving. We have a pretty good track record with respect to taking transit. That 23.3% translates into 522 million TTC rides a year. And we're not doing quite as great when it comes to walking to work and cycling to work, although when we zero in and look specifically on our downtown, which is comparable to Vancouver, we in fact see that the number divides up to be a third, a third, a third. A third of people cycle, a third of people take transit, and a third of people drive to work in the context of the downtown. Now let's look at the Vancouver CMA mode of travel. Shockingly, and surprise, surprise, you guys are a tad higher than, in fact, we are for driving to work. You're a little bit lower with respect to the number of people that move on transit, a little bit higher in terms of pedestrians, and this, too, is driven by the city of Vancouver, and a little bit higher, just 0.2 percentage points, with respect to number of cyclists. How we move about, I believe, is a fundamental part, an indicator of the health of our cities. And with respect to this indicator, we're very, very similar. I believe that there are, in fact, some critical success factors that we, all of us in this room, must cultivate if we truly believe that cities are the solution as opposed to the problem moving forward. And a key part of this presentation today will focus specifically on those critical success factors. But I do need to be clear here before I begin, because there are some astronomical numbers that get bandied about claiming that not only are we an urban nation, but we are becoming an urban world. In the last census, 81% of the Canadian population was identified as living in urban places. It almost sounds like the problem has solved itself. Well, not quite. Canadian cities are, in fact, primarily suburban. Some seminal research undertaken by Professor Dave Gordon at Queen's University demonstrates and identifies that when we dig a little deeper into those numbers and we parse out the different urban forms that exist in our so-called urban places, that Canadian cities are, in fact, primarily suburban. And in fact, Canadian municipalities are primarily auto-based suburbs. You'll see here that our dominant urban form, despite the great successes of the Vancouver Peninsula and downtown Toronto, is really auto-oriented suburbs. This is not a nuance to be brushed off as sort of interesting or whimsical. Rather, our suburbs are a key driver of some of the most significant challenges that we collectively need to solve. So I'd like to pause just a moment and focus on why I believe this idea of building broad and deep constituencies for progressive city building is not frivolous, but is in fact an imperative. And the first is this. We in fact have, sorry, just got my slides mixed up here. We in fact are not as rich as we thought we were. In Perverse Cities, Pamela Blay argues that as a result of crude public policies, a wide range of urban goods and services are subject to inaccurate pricing, which results in what she calls perverse subsidies. We actually subsidize things that we don't see as desirable, incentives that promote sprawl while discouraging more efficient urban forms. We have built infrastructure in our suburbs that is extremely costly on a per capita basis. Today, it's underutilized and nearly impossible to replace or maintain. It was developed unwittingly with hidden municipal subsidies, and now there is a growing and great pressure in some places to protect this infrastructure from any kind of densification or change. Our future success in transforming our suburbs to sustainable places is contingent on the extent to which we capitalize on these past investments and strategically link together future investments with land use planning that promotes and supports walkable communities. Now, the second reason why building constituencies for city building is so important is this. The new economy will leave us behind. Urban walkable places have resilience in downturns and retain value. From a recently released study in the US by the Education Fund comparing transportation trends, we learn the economies of urbanized areas with the largest declines in driving appear to have been much less affected by the recession, according to employment, income, and poverty indicators. A knowledge-based economy, as opposed to a resource extraction economy, is based on creating places. Areas that don't change will be left behind. In the new economy, a diverse knowledge and innovation-based economy is essential to future resiliency in our economy and managing the boom and bust of a one-industry town. We need diversity in our economies, in our cities. Now, the third reason why building constituencies for city building really matters is, in fact, this. The legacies we are leaving our children are, in fact, frightening. And I won't spend too much time talking about this idea because it's really a very simple one that has been made very profoundly over the course of the past summer from east to west. The legacy that we are leaving our children is currently uncertain, often devastating weather. It's the weather. And the second, alluded to in my first point, is costly, existing hard infrastructure that, given the changes that we see in our weather, is increasingly becoming more and more difficult to maintain and sustain. We need to think very carefully about the implication of drawing away monies from soft infrastructure like affordable housing and transit investments and putting undue hardship on communities to build unsustainable, auto-oriented transit infrastructure that's causing and resulting in one of our greatest legacies, and that is changing weather. The fourth reason why building constituencies for city building matters is this. Echo boomers want something different, whether our cities change or not. TD Economics, in a study published this year called Return to the Core, states a highly skilled, highly educated, and young population is trading the larger and what was once conceived to be relatively affordable housing, in part because it's subsidized, choices of their parents for proximity to transit, work, and amenities within walking distance. Echo boomers are the future of our economy, the future of our labor force. Communities that do not attract and retain this precious cohort, which is the largest cohort in Toronto and the fastest growing cohort in Canada, and the largest cohort on the Vancouver Peninsula, will in fact not exist in the future economy. This cohort is desperate for urban life, and the risk is whether or not they will be able to afford it. So a key question becomes, can we adapt and transform suburban neighborhoods to become the complete communities with a diversity of housing types and tenures and amenities within walking distance? I think I might just take a moment here to reinforce the magnitude of the problem we face, the challenge that we face in creating great urban places, just by showing for you for a minute how far we have to go. Because we like to usually show, particularly as planners, the pretty pictures, but they don't even come close to telling the true story of what exists in our Canadian suburban landscape. So let me show you some candidate slides, and they could in fact be anywhere. This is in fact Edmonton, and this is a little bit of Edmonton too, and this is a little bit of Edmonton, but again, these slides could be images of anywhere. You might recognize some of them as being Calgary or Toronto. They don't look much different. They're not really places so much as costly mistakes. And in fact, one of the challenges that we face is how we will transform these places to use the embedded energy, to use the infrastructure, the very costly infrastructure that's already been developed in order to create places that will attract that echo boomer generation. I want to suggest that we have a great opportunity before us. And that great opportunity is to imagine. We must, in fact, ask a question. What could these places become? Because it's this that is our greatest challenge as city builders, is using and transforming this existing infrastructure into sustainable communities and places. So I want you to imagine with me, just imagine for a moment, a very urban place. Let's begin with your home. Imagine a good place to live that's affordable and well located. Quality housing near where you work, or exactly where you want to live. Your first choice, a place where you can put down roots, know your neighbors, feel safe, and thrive. Imagine your neighborhood being a place where you can get all the things that you need. Good parks, maybe even community gardens, good schools, places to shop and worship, or go get your hair cut or visit the doctor, all within walking distance or a short transit ride of home. The city you are imagining might be a place where you can choose to commute less. Less driving, less commuting, a smaller house with less stuff, a reduced ecological footprint so that you can have more. More time with your friends and family, more time engaged in your community, more time for cooking or painting or exercising, more time in parks and ravines, or more time just kibbutzing in coffee shops. Imagine your city as a place where it is possible to move in one generation from being a newcomer with needs, a newcomer to being firmly established in the middle class. You can arrive in this city with nothing but desire and commitment. And the infrastructure you need to get started, like libraries and transit and education and job creation opportunities, They'll all be at your fingertips to make it happen. Because all that you bring to this city that we are imagining together, whoever you are, will be recognized as adding value, as making the city a richer place. This city we're imagining is a place of innovation, a place that attracts growth. As a place, it's a great place to learn, and it offers many opportunities for creative work. You don't have to move away to find a job or because you cannot afford housing. Your kids don't need to move away because they can afford housing in this city. They also have access to good jobs close to where they live. This city, capitalizing on the knowledge and the skills of its people, would be a place of resilience in an economic downturn. This wouldn't be a city of quick fixes. No, this is a city that knows itself, a city with a vision for the future. And imagine, in this city, residents know what to expect. They know that they can live and invest and they can work and they can play with confidence because they know what they can expect from their city. Imagine your city as a place of beauty, a place where design matters because the resources that we need to survive, like land and water and air, are handled with care in this city, where we invest in public buildings and public spaces that we share, like squares and streetscapes, because we know and we value both inspiration and happiness in everyday life in this city. This is sort of a wonderful promise, isn't it? A wonderful possibility, this city of the future. Now, some of you might be saying, yes, that's my city. That's where I live. But we know that's not how most of us live. Most of us don't have that many choices. Our challenge, because I suspect that I'm speaking to a room with many urbanists, is this. Is this vision what our suburbs might become? Given that we have built and are continuing to build development that we know is not sustainable over the long term, I sometimes question whether we are going to be able to make the necessary shift. We have many of the planning tools that we need in order to make this vision real. We have some of the best planning schools in the world right here in Canada. You have one of them right here in this city. Not only are we exporting our planning expertise, but our architectural expertise, too, is in high demand elsewhere. And yet, consensus on how to achieve the sustainable urban future in communities that need to adapt and evolve and change, places that we know need to transform, consensus on how to change often eludes us. And my friends, this isn't a design issue. The design, the planning, it's achievable. We know what we need to do. Our challenge is generating a shared consensus. So let me tell you what I believe is, in fact, our greatest hope. In struggling with this question and the magnitude of the challenge before us, I have sought to assess change. I've really been trying to think through and identify the places and times when fundamental shifts in ideas and ideology have taken place and resulted in desired outcomes, and to understand instances when visions and plans have in fact worked. And I believe that there are three critical and entwined success factors that lead us towards this vision of great cities. And the first is this. We are, in fact, rewarded for being optimistic. So the first critical success factor for change is the need to believe in a future better than the past and even better than the present. There was a time when we believed in putting a man on the moon. It would never have happened if we didn't believe it was possible. Think of how outrageous this is, to be standing here on Earth and looking up at the moon and thinking, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could get a man up there? You have to believe it's possible. And there was a time, a period of great optimism, when we, in fact, not only believed in putting a man on the moon, there was a time when we also believed in investing profoundly in creating great places to live. As an example, in the city of Toronto, we have something called the Bloor Viaduct, which links the center of the city to the east of the city. It's a truss-arch bridge that spans the Don Valley Parkway, and it connects the center of the city to an area that at the time when the bridge was envisioned was farmer fields. It wasn't yet developed. In today's dollars, this was a $33 million infrastructure project. It was completed in 1918, and it included something radical, and that is this. It included creating a lower deck to accommodate the subway. But the amazing thing was, in 1918, there was no subway in Toronto. Imagine the vision of saying someday, so in 1918, someday there's going to be so many people who live on the other side of the Don Valley Expressway that not only will we have a reason to go over there, but we will have a subway system in our city. And if we do not plan today for that subway and accommodating it on this bridge, we will in fact preclude it from happening. The subway connection to the eastern part of the city didn't happen for 48 years. It was 48 years later. It would never have happened if in 1918 that infrastructure had not been built. Can you imagine us today? Think of the cycles we plan on today. Can you imagine us today thinking about infrastructure for 50 years out? We're not planning our transit systems for 5 years out. And I have to take a little poke here because I traveled your Canada line today, and I just didn't get the baby platforms. I just didn't get it. Imagine building a subway system for a city. Imagine building infrastructure for a city that doesn't exist. Think about that in the context of the underbuilding of the Canada line. Belief is a prerequisite for acting boldly. And as an aside, leaders who believe, whether it's politicians, civil servants, bureaucrats, business leaders, community leaders, do not use polling to drive leadership. They look at polling as maybe an interesting snapshot of where we are, but they do not mistake polls to be telling them something about what should be. R.C. Harris, who was the Commissioner of Public Works in TO at the time, he had to believe in a future subway system and believe that that system would play a prominent role in how people moved about, even though it didn't exist. So he planned for it, and it was a battle, because, of course, the politicians at the time didn't want to pay for it. The outcomes we see in our city are the outcome of believing in what might be long before it happens. We've been having a conversation in Toronto about investing in transit, and I've sometimes asked, if I told you for $100 a year that we could have a state-of-the-art public transit system in this city, would you be willing to pay it? Just $100 a year? 200 will meet all our transit needs. Well, one evening I was having this conversation with a friend, and he looked at me and he said, you know what? I get it. I get what you're saying. But I just don't believe it. I just don't believe it would happen. So I'm going to hang on to my $100. We need to believe. But belief alone isn't enough. You need to combine that belief and shape it with my next critical success factor, and it's this: the need to cultivate deep understandings. When we build understanding, we in fact increase belief. There's been a lot of excitement about the potential of open data, and I believe in open data, don't get me wrong. The idea that data should be freely accessible to everyone to use and republish as they wish. But information without understanding, let's not kid ourselves, that's just information. Information must be translated into knowledge. It must become part of a narrative, the story we are collectively writing about where we have been and where it is that we are seeking to be. When we hold public engagement sessions as a municipality, it's imperative that we shape that conversation with information, analysis, and evidence. We need to use this as the basis for generating and growing understanding. But it is extremely difficult to build understanding in the absence of a clear, coherent vision of the future. In the absence of a shared vision for the future and clarity about the challenges that we are trying to solve, change becomes an imposition. Why are we changing? As a consultant and now as a chief planner, I focus in all of my planning processes on generating consensus around the drivers for change. Until consensus has been achieved on the problem that we're trying to solve in any given process, there's no point talking about the solution. We have to generate consensus about what it is that we, in fact, need to fix. Adding density to my neighborhood, for example, is just about more density, more cars, more inconvenience to me personally if I, as a resident, have no understanding of the larger problem that we're trying to solve, and if I do not have clarity about, and even worse, if I don't buy in to the vision of the future city that we collectively are seeking to create. We generate this understanding by building a discourse that places conversations about changes that are needed in a city in a larger, broader context. And I'll be frank, I'm not a huge fan of the term eco-density. And one of the reasons not is because I think if eco-density, which as a concept is very powerful and has a tremendous amount of merit, but if it had been called walkable neighborhoods, I think it links into a larger vision that you're seeking to achieve. And to do so would have shaped the conversation and could shape the conversation and its objectives in a fundamentally different way because it would link into a larger narrative, a projected vision about the future of the city. When we talk about change without a compelling narrative for why this change matters, people retreat. It's not surprising. People retreat to what they know, and what they know is the status quo. City building demands creating a culture of learning such that we bring people into our conversations about city building so that learning is happening both ways. When we do so, we raise our collective consciousness, and this allows us to broker much more sophisticated solutions to our urban challenges. I had an experience a few years ago when I was working as a consultant, and a woman arrived. We had a session, about 500 people in the room, everyone divided up into tables of about 10, and a woman arrived. She sat down at the table, and she was very quiet, and I thought, uh-oh, she feels intimidated or for some reason like she cannot participate. And so on the break, I went over to her and I said, how are you doing? How are you finding the session? And she said, oh, I'm fine. She said, I came here today, but I've never been to a public meeting before, and I was going to tell you all the things that are bugging me that I think are wrong about the city. And as I've been sitting here and listening to the others around the table talking, I've realized I have a lot to learn about the city and about how other people experience the city. This, to me, is good city building. It's good city building when we have conversations where we don't back each other into a corner, but instead we gather close together and we allow each other to learn from one another. We are no further ahead if we do not use both our individual and our collective intelligence to further advance our understanding. This we must do. It's very, very easy to ask people what they think, and it's not really very useful if they're ill-informed. it is much more challenging to create constituencies for progressive ideas by facilitating processes based on learning and respect for our shared intelligence. So we need to be spending more time, I believe, seeking to understand. And this isn't like it's something we can go out and do once and it ends. It's fundamental to our project of being a democratic society that we're continually building understanding. And this leads to the next and the third critical success factor. Belief and understanding are also contingent on the need to engage. Both belief and understanding grow through engagement. How does engagement take place? Well, as we all know, it's much, much more than voting once every 3 or 4 or however many years, although that matters, and that matters profoundly. And in fact, I would suggest that voting without understanding is a profound risk, both to our cities and to our society. It is imperative that we understand and we identify our spheres of influence to determine how we can expand our influence. What is it that you understand or that you are seeking to understand? What are the tools that you can use to engage within your sphere of influence? There's lots of important things you can do. You can blog, you can write, you can tweet, you can participate in meetings, you can hold kitchen table discussions, forums, seminars, roundtables. There's lots of things that you can do to build conversations within the various areas that you have knowledge, expertise, and influence. What I'd like to do is just shift the conversation a little bit and tell you about some of the things that I've been doing within my sphere of influence in order to put in practice this idea of fostering and generating belief by building understanding. And one of the first things that I'll talk a little bit about is what we've called the Chief Planner Roundtables. And the Chief Planner Roundtables were really an experiment that kind of went absolutely crazy, in part because the intention was to see if we could get some diverse interests. We wanted to have interdisciplinary conversations, both with people external to City Hall, as well as with key players in various divisions at City Hall, to address some of the most challenging issues that we face. These are our first 3 topics. The first one was about the public realm, and the challenge was to get those involved in engineering and planning, as well as technical services, as well as outside expertise at the table, talking about how we could fundamentally change our urban fabric. The second was about climate change and how we could build a resilient city. And the third was about this key challenge, which I believe is the most important challenge facing the City of Toronto, which is the next generation of those auto-oriented suburbs. Those were the first 3. I held them at the beginning of 2013 in the spring. The next 3 were really an outcome of the third one, the next generation suburbs, where we focused specifically on deepening our understanding of the suburbs by focusing on the form and shape of the suburbs. And part of this was about myth busting. One of the key things that we learned at the outset is that 50% of the people who live in suburbs in the City of Toronto are in fact renters. We also learned that within 8 of our priority communities, so these are our communities most in need in our suburbs, that over 60% of the residents did not in fact own driver's license, despite the fact that these communities are in areas that are not well accessed by higher order transit. The objectives of the roundtables were to talk about the big issues, the citywide issues. As a planning division, we hold over 450 community meetings a year, which, yes, you heard that right. That means every day of the week, Monday to Thursday, there's anywhere between 3 and 5 community meetings taking place. We hold over 350 workshops. Last year, we had over 17,000 people participate in in-person meetings. We have approximately 50,000 Twitter interactions in last year alone. This was about focusing on not the neighborhood-specific issues, but that bigger vision of the city, the bigger issues that we face at a city-wide level. And our objective was to generate creative, fresh ideas by being very transparent about the risks that we face. We identified a variety of ways to draw people into the conversation. Now, when we launched these roundtables, we asked people to register on the website because in the committee room we could only hold about 200 people. And within 24 hours, all the tickets were gone, which was really interesting because it signaled that there's a deep desire to be engaged in these kinds of conversations about the future of the city. So we partnered with Rogers Television, and the roundtables are now live streamed, and they're very popular on Rogers Television. They've been an important partner. We also live tweet the roundtables, and we set up a website, and we also encourage people to follow up if they have longer comments or statements that they would like to integrate into the conversation by sending us emails. And I get emails with links to document. I hear about projects that people are working on in the city. It's been a very important, multifaceted way to broaden the conversation about the largest issues that we face. But we also produce a document. This was volume 1, which was a summary of the first 3 roundtables that identifies both the risks and opportunities related to each of the topics and a series of key actions for moving forward. So, for example, as a result of our Resilient City Roundtable, we now have a cross-divisional Resilient City working group in the City of Toronto that was an outcome of that work. And the objective is to capture this conversation so that we can broaden it and distribute it to a whole variety of different audiences. And you can see here some of the images of what that looks like. A second initiative is called Planners in Public Space. Now, this again is about this idea of taking the sphere of influence we have in city planning and figuring out how to broaden it. And part of what we did in Planners in Public Spaces, we went to the places where people already were. Our objective was to reach beyond the audiences that are going to come into a public meeting, audiences that will typically come to us, to go to audiences that wouldn't typically participate in a planning process. And we thought we had a wonderful opportunity with the summer months to go to the places where people already congregate in the city and to talk about planning and planning practice in those places. We came up with this idea at the end of April. We launched this the beginning of the summer. We were victims of our own success. We launched this in a variety of different wards across the city, and we partnered with Lego in order to launch this because we wanted to raise awareness about the fact that planners were going to be out in public spaces talking about city building. And one of the wonderful opportunities as part of this process was to find new ways to draw children into our city building processes. We learned a whole variety of things that were important for us to know. Not only did we learn that people love their city, but we learned that people don't know how to access city government. And this was an opportunity for us to bring government to people. We set up in malls, subway stations, at farmers markets, and in public squares. And one of the key questions we have right now is, what do we do with this next? This was an initiative that was literally done on the sides of our desks. It raised a tremendous amount of profile, and it's raised really important questions for us about the way the City Planning Division can be a leader in facilitating citywide conversations. What's important here is that this was an initiative that was driven by the City Planning Division, and you see me in the center of the screen here talking to one of the city councillors. The city councillors latched on because they recognized it as a wonderful opportunity to be proactive in their communities. And that cutie pie in the center of the screen is mine. That's my son. It also allowed us to have conversations about the city in a context where everyone's blood pressure was pretty low. Often we're in community meetings where the stakes are very high. We're talking about a change, and we don't really have any a lot of trust with communities. This was, in fact, about going out and building the trust in the absence of a high-pressure environment where there's a sense that imminent change is upon a community. And it was, in fact, a very exciting initiative for planning staff, because most of my planners, like any other planners that are in the room, got into planning because they like working with communities and, in fact, being proactive. This was a very simple tool within our sphere of influence that we could use to engage. The last example that I'm going to talk to you about today is about transportation planning in the City of Toronto. And I should add that I had the great opportunity today to meet with transportation planners at the City of Vancouver and to talk about some of our initiative and to talk about some of the planning that's taking place here. And I learned something that I didn't know, which is that our planning is in fact structured in a very different way. At the time of amalgamation, there was a very important and strategic decision made by Paul Bedford, the chief planner at that time, to locate transportation planning within the planning division. This was intended to ensure that there was a strong alignment between land use planning and transportation planning, that there was a connection. Our official plan directs our growth to our primary transportation corridors. One of the key challenges we have today is the success in our official plan in doing so, which has resulted in a tremendous amount of additional riders. Growth is happening on those corridors, and we are the fastest growing city in North America, but we haven't been increasing our transit infrastructure. At a policy level, the connection has been very strongly made, but in fact it hasn't been happening in the implementation. So we created this campaign because we're trying to solve that problem, the problem of growth that is happening where the infrastructure is not being upgraded. Now, this process is actually called a review of the City of Toronto's transportation policies. We decided it needed a better name. It needed a better name because we wanted to reach out to those constituencies who wouldn't normally participate in a process about transportation policies. And we wanted to make the connection between the policies, the work that we do every day, and the quality of life and experience that people have in the city. Some of you may know that we have the distinct honor of, in fact, having one of the worst commute times in North America, although I understand Vancouver might be nudging us out of first place. But the average commute in Toronto is 45 minutes each way, which means Torontonians spend the equivalent of one workday a week traveling to and from work. We have a very significant transportation problem. So this process, and this is a snapshot of our website, was about helping people understand what's at stake and also drawing people in to have their say in an iterative dialogue. And our objective here was to build belief in the importance in investing in public transit, while at the same time encouraging people to have a say. Our vision in our plan is about 4 key ideas. Moving people. Now, this may sound obvious, but in fact, in most municipalities, transportation planning isn't about moving cars. We're shifting the lens to be about people, which means you plan your infrastructure in a very different way. We also wanted to prioritize goods movement, recognizing that moving forward, our industrial base is a fundamental part of our diverse economy in the city, and prioritizing goods movement is fundamental to a sustainable and resilient economy. But we also recognize that the future is about moving less. And this is where connecting land use planning and transportation planning becomes so important. Because if we see the future as being about moving less, it means we plan our communities in a very different way. We plan our communities to be places where you can live, where you can work, where you can play, all within walking distance or a short transit ride from home. And lastly, a key part of our vision is about moving minds. We recognize that building understanding is about recognizing that the way we've moved in the past, when we were a smaller city, is not going to be the way we move in the future when we are a much denser and a much larger city. And we need to build understanding that if we continue to grow at an exponential rate, but we don't shift the way we invest in movement and plan for movement in a fundamentally different way, we will in fact end up in a situation where the congestion simply continues to worsen. So we created whiteboard video. You can see this at feelingcongested.ca. This was about the driver for change, making it very clear. This is the problem that we're seeking to solve. And if people didn't get this piece, the problem we're trying to solve, it didn't matter if we were talking about solutions. This was about building the belief that change is needed and in fact required. We also generated a tool with MetroQuest, which went on the website. This was about giving people an opportunity to play with some of the content around investing in transit, such that people would build their understanding and also give us some pretty important input and data with respect to their preferred methods of paying for investments in transit. We also created discussion guides so that roundtable working groups could be established amongst different stakeholder groups. We created toolkits that we could distribute widely that could be the basis for explaining some of the complexity around our methodology for investing in transit. We held discussion panels, meetings on the move. Meant we held meetings on subways, buses, at subway platforms, on streets, and on bikes. We also held intercepts to drive people who had never been at a meeting on the subway to participate by going to the subway and becoming informed, going to the website and becoming informed about the process. And yes, you see me here handing out Kleenexes, because we are, of course, very clever, and this was called Feeling Congested. We managed to get a Kleenex company to donate to us 20,000 Kleenexes, which we then plastered with a sticker that said, "Feeling congested, have your say," and it had the website. We didn't want to give something out that people would drop on the floor, and this worked because I had an awful cold last week, and I dug deep into my purse, and I pulled out one of these things, and I thought, that's exactly what we want to happen, for people to reach in and grab out and go, oh yeah, I'm going to check out that website. And our objective, again, was about reaching and extending our sphere of influence to those who wouldn't normally participate in a conversation about boring old transportation policies. We also went on various radio shows, including News Talk that was directed at an auto-oriented audience. And we also had highway signs that had the website located on them to drive drivers to participate on the website as well. We held open houses. And I just want to say that this is one of my favorite newspaper articles out of all of them over the past 12 months. And it's because of this. You probably can't read the fine print, but the very first sentence says, "I used to hate cyclists." This is our objective with respect to moving minds, building understanding. This was a Toronto Sun reporter who we invited to be a part of our consultation on a bike. And as a result of her experience cycling in the downtown, which she had never done before, she's on a Bixie bike there. As a result of her experience being in a cluster of cyclists and talking to the other cyclists, she no longer hated cyclists, and in fact recognized our key message, which was cycling maybe used to be for radicals and recreational riding, but cycling needs to be in the future about transportation and recognized as a key part of our transportation infrastructure. We also have results from a poll that we conducted, and you can see here the success of our efforts at building understanding around the importance of investing in transit infrastructure. This has, in fact, been a long and challenging conversation that we will need to sustain. Everything you just saw there has only been going on for a year. We are halfway through the process, but I don't imagine this conversation will ever end. We need to continually build constituencies for progressive ideas in city building, and we are building a dialogue. We're learning through trial and error, and we are experiencing some wins as that shift in opinion around investing in transit infrastructure demonstrates. It's imperative to identify your sphere of influence and to determine how it is that you might expand it. Today, one of the great joys in my job has actually been committee meetings, believe it or not. I'm exposing myself, I know, as a nerdy planner. But stick with me here. One of the reasons is because at committee meetings, when the deputation is belief with understanding, and this is often, it in fact becomes a very powerful moment in the room. The room is quiet, heads are cocked, people are listening, opinions are shifting. Understanding is in fact being built. These are the moments of meaningful engagement that we need to aspire to if we care deeply about building great cities. Belief, understanding, and engagement are essential if we are going to shift from a culture of underinvesting in affordable housing and underinvesting in transit and underinvesting in green initiatives. Belief, understanding, and engagement are essential for change. So I'd like to leave you with just 2 ways that you, in fact, can build on these ideas of owning your city, to participate in building broad and deep constituencies for progressive city building. And the first I'll call individual action. A city isn't something that happens to you. You make choices every day that create your city. Toronto's Cabbagetown neighborhood is called Cabbagetown because 100 years ago, Irish immigrants chose to turn the only little patch of land they had into places for growing food. You can choose to live somewhere that allows you to walk to work. You can choose to cycle or to take transit, or you can choose to drive. You can choose to walk out the door and down the street and to support local retailers in your neighborhood, if local retail matters to you. Every time you make a choice about the way you will be in the city, you turn the city into something of your own choosing. The second I'll call collective action. Although as individuals we can influence our city in small and incremental steps, the biggest decisions that fundamentally shape our cities are made by us as a collective people, in those committee rooms, at council, at various levels of government. It is through our political processes that we decide whether to invest in transit that we need, whether we will support that affordable housing. It does not matter if you are the smartest, brightest planner, developer, architect, or academic in the room. It does not matter if you are not finding ways to engage in shaping the political decision-making that in turn shapes your city. You need to believe in a future that is better than the past and better than the present. Your city needs you to engage and to sustain your engagement. It's not a one-shot deal. Your city needs you to lead. Thank you.